Welcome to Rauta's retrospective videos. This time it's, however, a band that I previously judged with my ranking worst to best. Why so? Because the band was actually disbanded years and years ago. So little did I know back in the days when I made the video a few years ago that this band would make a comeback. It's a welcome comeback, however, because this band is good, and it's called And Oceans from Finland. Let's tune for the band's Metal Archive site because there is much more to see than my boring face. So let's talk about the band and how it has changed throughout the years, how has the music changed, and how has the comeback been. There's so many topics to start from, but obviously I want to talk the music first. With the music, with the lineup changes, cover art, lyrics, whatsoever, coming a little bit later in the video. Now, those of you who have been following the channel for quite some time already know that I am currently doing a project related to original Finnish black metal, that is black metal history from Finland, focusing on the bands that were either founded during the 90s or just before the 90s. But since there are only like two bands before the 90s, we can call it bands from the 90s. And Oceans will be obviously part of that because they were founded as early as 1995. So quite early on, apart from the obvious pioneers such as Beherit, Imbel Nazarene, Archgoat, and the like. But we're not there yet, so we can totally focus on the given band with more details than in that episode because there are certain rules with that series and so forth. And I will be just more like lightly going through in that series the whole discography and all. With this particular retrospective, I must say I'm gonna go through all the releases, more or less. There are some exceptions. And obviously the topics mentioned before. So let's get it going and talk about the band. Now, before we can talk about the actual birth of the band, it's worth noting that these guys already had some other adventures during or before And Oceans were formed. And that probably explains why there is not such a typical name, ... And Oceans. Or should we say 3 full stops and Oceans. It was never exactly the band that was seen more like a typical copycat band, let's do some Norwegian or Swedish style of black metal and include satanic and other topics which are very, very fitting for black metal band. And Oceans were always quite different. But they had other bands, and one of them is Yesterday, including some of the same members. But like it's here said on Metal Archives, it's not a precursor to And Oceans. It's a different band, but they did play death metal, much like a lot of Norwegian and Swedish and Finnish bands before entering the world of black metal. But like I said, And Oceans is not really a typical black metal band. I mean, if you really go nitpicking about topics and all, one could really question, are they really black metal to begin with? Because there are no typical satanic topics and lyrics. It's not about devil worship or burning down churches and whatsoever. So what exactly really makes it black metal? Musical perspective? Sure, we'll get to that. But the other terms, it's questionable. But we are not here nitpicking about that because in general consensus it's included in the black metal scene. And in my opinion, fair deal. Black metal should not be narrowed down to very, very narrow-minded topics and, like that, because that would leave a lot of bands outside that, and then you would actually have to create a new genre for it. And it's not like dark metal is gonna count. It's a little bit different thing. So we're not gonna debate how much or how little black metal And Oceans really is, because musically it has always been that, more or less, until it started to change, which I will mention when we go through the whole discography and all. So it started much like bands used to do, and I wish still did, going through the demo phase. So they had this demo, Wave 1995, demo tape with few tracks, and to be honest, it's not really a good one. But then again, that's how it was. Back in the days, you first made some songs, then you put them on a demo, and maybe you sent them to your, pen pals, tape trading and all. And of course labels, which would then again okay, what are these guys about? Wave demo is a very, very rough version of what it would be later on. But it already showcased some of the crazy ideas the band was later on known for. I mean, think about the song called I Am the Disco, I Am the Dance Floor. What the hell? So these guys weren't really trying to put themselves on a map in a way that a lot of typical, black metal bands would be. But which changed already with this demo, Mare Liberum, which had some of the songs which would be later on an album. And as you can see here, some of the tracks are indeed in Swedish. Now, this comes from a city known as Pietarsaari and Vaasa, which are more or less like 50-50 Finnish and Swedish-speaking people. And this band actually has these people who can really, totally nail both languages. And on top of that, fine with English. So coming from more Swedish weighted part of Finland, really put a little bit different vibe to the whole band. It wasn't like your typical Finnish band, like either going full, Finnish, Horna, for example, or English for that matter, which meant a lot of other bands. But these guys went a little bit Swedish in the mix. So maybe as a surprise it came that the dynamic calorie of thoughts is indeed English. Now this already has the maritime topics, not just and oceans in the name, but also these naval knot on the cover, some writings and maps and all that. So very, very different from the black metal things. And of course the Swedish lyrics were right there. And when we're talking about lyrics, these are not exactly the types that you get to read as an English-speaking person, or Finnish for that matter. For example, there's this song called The Room of Thousand Arts, yet the lyrics are in Swedish. And this, applies to the lyrics here in the other songs as well, and also the song names. However, there are one song with, says Finnish, kärsimyksen vaaleat kädet, pale hands of suffering. And once again, if you open the lyrics, they are in Swedish. And there is a little bit even French in the song names, and then there are some lines in Finnish. So already this is showcasing that the guys were playing with 3 different languages. They were making their own signature style, very, very known in that part when it comes to lyrics. Musically, this was very, very fresh from Finland, sounding symphonic. Melodic, yes. Symphonic, yes. Catchy, sure. So the band was more like a Swedish-Finnish take on what Emperor, for instance, did with, their 2 first albums. And in my opinion, And Oceans really started strong with the debut album. In a way, it's a classic from the late 90s, but it's also something that kind of is more or less recognized as the Ocean style. Things were about to change a little bit later, but for this, it made their sound and style solid. Everybody was like, okay, this is And Oceans. They're a band from western coast of Finland, and they do know their style with symphonic black metal style, which is kind of like easy to approach. That kind of a low entry level of black metal. I mean, it's melodic, it's catchy, and those keyboard parts really saved it. And plus, the guys are good, with their musical instruments. Whether we're talking about guitars or drummers, the band always had really, really good drummers. And this is just more emphasized later on with the drummer changes. But we'll get back to that later on. Now, soon after their first album, they made this interesting split with the Norwegian band Bloodthorn. This is not so easy to access as the band's full albums on streaming services, but you can find them on YouTube, these individual songs. What is curious is that they both covered GGFH as well as one another. So And Oceans had Bloodthorn cover and Bloodthorn had And Oceans cover. Quite an interesting take. And this is then again, enforced with a rather peculiar cover. Their original vocalist Kenna, here having glasses on and signature style, putting his tongue out and all that stuff. And then you have this vocalist from Bloodthorn, nowadays in Hordom Rife, doing his grinning face. We're Norwegians, we're more serious than you crazy Finns. So onwards we go to Symmetry of I, The Circle of O. Second album, And Oceans, and the art gets weirder. There's this guy or person split up, some kind of guts coming out, but it's kind of a weird. And it certainly doesn't look like your typical black metal cover. In my opinion, this is kind of an ugly cover, but I don't know. It does its job in terms of Andotians. Here they have started to go more English. And if you read about the lyrics, they're kind of vague, they're weird. But then again, so are some of the members in the band, especially the ex-vocalist Kenna. A good friend of mine, always a crazy character, and really started, putting the band on the map as one of the crazy guys who shouted weird things live and all that stuff. Definitely not for everybody. He managed to piss a lot of people on with the stage presence and all, which got me more interested in the band. I mean, if he was the guy who could, provoke people in the extreme metal community or scene, I gotta like this guy. I mean, we became good friends later on, but little did I know early on that he would be the guy who would, become the kind of a phase and symbol for Andotians being weird. I mean, the rest of the guys aren't that weird. They're great guys, all good people. I've been friends with the guys for a long time. Not maybe close friends as with the vocalist, or ex-vocalist in this case, but I mean, they've always been really, really nice guys. But they were more on the background, letting Kenna do the weird things on the front, and he surely did. Now, musically, Symmetry of I, The Circle of O, basically continues what Dynamic Color of Thoughts started, but there were changes. In my opinion, the changes were quite natural, but as an album, this isn't nearly as good as the original one. It's not like it's bad, but it's more like missing the so-called hit elements. Clearly, it's a good successor to that, and like I said, some people will like it more than the debut album. I find it a tad bit weaker, but that doesn't mean it's not worth listening to. It's a decent album for sure, just not as good. Now, then again, there were a couple of these compilations. Once again, compilations are compilations, so we're going to skip that. No point to kind of recap what was going on. And then starts the transition phase, only a few years later after the debut album, Andotians Am God. I'm not going to do the dotting here. This already put the different kind of cover on the album and whatever, different logos and shit, and I'm like, what is this band all about? Suddenly didn't look even that much of a black metal album as the previous ones, which, like I mentioned, didn't really do that stuff. Also, the topics were even more bizarre, weird, in a way, pioneering their own style. Imagine things like Intelligence is Sexy on a black metal album. Or, I don't know, a lot of these things are not exactly your typical ones. Even though I gotta say, I like, for instance, a song called Tears Have No Name. But what this album is doing is, in a way, it's kind of presenting their new style. Like I said, it's transition stuff, and it started, incorporating more industrial elements. We'll get into that later on. And this is already like abandoning a little bit of what they did before and starting a new era. But what this album is, in my opinion, mostly known for, it's a reference class production. It's really fucking fabulous. Even if I'm listening to this in my car, it sounds really powerful. Think the guitars, when they're shredding, it's almost like, oh, what the hell is this big band? It's so powerful. Everything here sounds like, wow. I don't know how much Century Media put money on it, but, even these days, some, 20 plus years later, a lot of bands don't really have this strong production. I'm not going to say it fits everything, but it's the kind of a mastermind thing what you really have here. If only for the production, this album is worth listening to. But in my opinion, it's also better than, the Symmetry of I album. And roughly on par with Dynamic Gallery of Thoughts, just a little bit less black metal. And then comes my favorite album. I'm going to list it here because this is no ranking video. Cipher, which is outright industrial album, metal album in the from the very beginning. And this already gets even weirder with the song names. Just some examples: Fragile, Pictures of Silence, Melting the Skies. Just one song name, and these are always more or less 3 parts. Or Nail, Another Saint Flesh, Celebrate the New Skin. What the, Also, this album was a little bit ahead of their time when this came out. It was meant to be kind of a genderless creature. I mean, you have those certain female ideas on the cover, but then again, it also looks kind of like male. So it was supposed to be this genderless person. And now think about it. This was 2002. And nowadays, obviously, there are lots of non-binary people out there. So this would be very, very much something that nowadays, if somebody put out an album like this with a cover like this, they would be saying, yeah, it's a woke band, it's a political statement. But if you know anything about at all, and Oceans never was political, never was making that. Most likely they were just taking a piss at it. Like I was saying, they managed to annoy people. They managed to raise a lot of questions. They were taking the other route. If other bands went like, okay, we're going to left or right. I'm not talking even political. It's just a metaphor. Like there's like two paths. You can go the easy way or a little bit different. And Usher's like, okay, we're going to take the third option. What the hell is the third option? Climb the sheer wall. What the hell? You cannot do this. And they did. Obviously, this is an album that divides people into various parts. I mean, first of all, like you can see here, the average score is not that high because this album is so weird compared to the previous ones. But I liked it because they made kind of a hit song pattern into industrial thing. And they started incorporating a lot of different ideas. That was, in my opinion, a big step from the previous album, the I'm God album. In a way, it was weirder, in a way not. Because I'm God was transition phase album. Cipher was an entity of its own. And that's when we take a look at here. 2005 to 2013, there was this band called Havoc Unit. Once again, I wouldn't say it was the same band as And Oceans, even if it's had same members, but here it is listed as. When 2005, sets like And Oceans were gone, Havoc Unit enters the game. And that's exactly what happened after Cipher. I mean, this was 2002, but if you really take a look, there was no other album anymore. There was this Collateral Damage Complete War series, which was a weird split with, different songs and all. I don't know if this song list is actually true here because, what it says here doesn't really seem to apply. I'm not sure if there's an error, but whatever. Anyhow, my point here is, after Cipher, there was no another And Oceans album. There was Havoc Unit, which is a totally different beast and a great band, but not And Oceans. And then it was pretty much gone. You had the split, you had the compilation, which just put two first albums under one cover, and then it was gone. And Oceans, no more. Obviously, there were these later on releases like this Synesthesia, including Havoc Unit and Oceans, the Syndicate. I think maybe some leftover tracks, or maybe they were just, fucking around with different things. These guys also had the band called O, which is here mentioned. Like a lot of these members have as an ex-band. O. At least two guys, but I'm not sure if there were many. If you look at past members like Kenna, the vocalist here, once again said O. And also here, Mardex, the ex-drummer, O. So that was kind of a weird thing. Even Siphon, the ex-guitar bass player, part of the O project. But that was a weird thing, and once again, a little bit aside of that stuff. So this guy went, I don't know, some kind of identity crisis. First, And Oceans were no more, then there was O, and then there was Havoc Unit. And years go by. And you had And Oceans coming back. One thing is worth mentioning, though, is that also, meanwhile, the band was more or less on break. Timo, the main guitarist player, with Teemu Saari, the other guitar player, they were doing other things. But Timo, for example, had Magenta Harvest on the side. So not only Festerday, which was not active, but there was Magenta Harvest, and there was Havoc Unit, there was O. So while And Oceans were more or less buried, these guys had other projects, which is kind of a given for a lot of musicians. So anyhow, after the band was split, these two splits came about, and it's more like those collectors only kind of stuff, not really something you need to have. And this applies also to this weird EP, which was released in 2019. This was mentioned to me, it's an 8-inch EP. Old songs, but very, very weird thing with only 40 copies, a real collector's item. This was something that we talked about with the band in their 2019 interview when they played at Steelfest. But anyway, after this, something happened with the lineup. Kenny had some kind of problems in his personal life or whatsoever, and he was removed from the band. There are different stories depending who you ask, whether he left the band or removed from the band or whatever, or whether it was the reason. Let's not go there. Let's just say he was not in the lineup anymore. So, and there's a new guy from the other band known as Fintroll. and also some other bands. And obviously we're talking about Martin's Lille Mons. He's also known for a lot of other bands, but I guess Fintroll is the one that really he's known for. But like I said, he also had his role in Chthonian or Dispute and so forth. And a great guy, great vocalist. I mean, why not? So he joined in 2019, and this was in a way a new start for the band after Kenny or Kenna was out of the band. And soon after, 2020, came the comeback album, Cosmic World Mother. Now, in a way, the circle is now complete. This is going back to the, ground zero, which means the first album, And Oceans. Suddenly it was, once again, this symphonic black metal with a lot of keyboards, great guitar melodies, and all. But it also sounded so much more modern. And now there's two ways that can typically happen when you do a comeback like this, like going back to your early years with the new lineup and all. It can go totally south and everybody's like, okay, please don't cover yourselves. Like, do cover songs of your previous ones. It's not going to work. Or it can really happen like it happened. They made comeback with a better album than ever before. Now, this is obviously just my opinion, but you know what it is. Cosmic World Mother is the album that could have come out already after Dynamic Gallery of Thoughts. It's kind of weird because there's more than 20 years difference. But it totally continues with the same path. So now you see Dynamic Gallery of Thoughts going this way, and the rest of the band's going that way. I mean, it's like forked. So this is almost like alternate reality. What if you know anything about comic stories about superheroes, or, those alternate timelines from movies, TV series, whatsoever, this is what to me seems, in hindsight, what happened to And Oceans. It's almost like two different realities, but not with different bands. I mean, we have the Batushkas and the like, which were split up, and then different bands started doing similar music with different lineups after arguments or whatsoever. But in And Oceans line, it's almost like we have the same guys, having two different entities, two different timelines going about. So it's almost like, yes, we did first album 1998, and a couple of more until 2005 we were no more. And then it's like reset button is hitting is hit, and then they do 2020, an album that could have been the successor to Dynamic Gallery of Thoughts. Anyway, this is just my take, not my theory or anything. It's just kind of weird because they really reset the band to its original settings. So what happens is that 3 years later, they had As in Gardens, So in Tombs, which is a successor to the previous albums, and in my opinion keeps the line intact. So this is very, very much continuing the path with which they started when they made the comeback. So restarted and made a successor to it. And in my opinion, these two are my favorite And Oceans albums. And it's really, really nice that they be able to do that because, like I said, those comebacks are not given. There's so many ways to them go south and fail and all that shit. But one thing is worth mentioning now that we talk about lyrics. If the early lyrics were in Swedish and then they switched in English and went for very vague things and all that stuff, with Cosmic World Mother and As in Gardens, they went into different territory. Philosophical maybe once again, but it's a very, very different style. For instance, they're a lot longer and the style is different. And this obviously goes with the vocalist change and who knows what. So here when you take a look at the themes for And Oceans, it says philosophy, which I guess I can pretty much agree on. So once again, when we're talking about the bands being black metal, but not exactly satanic, Luciferian, occult, anti-Christian and so forth, yeah, And Oceans didn't do that early on, and they most certainly don't do it nowadays. So these are the reasons why one could really question, do they even play black metal? But like I said, in my opinion, it's pointless because musically they're exactly doing that. With maybe Cipher being the exception to the rule, because that's not really a black metal album. Not musically, not lyrically, not thematically. But also what is worth noting is that when they made comeback, they changed their graphic style. It's not really recognizable as old And Oceans. First of all, you don't see the logos here. And this is more like a kind of a weird sci-fi thing, really. Sci-fi philosophic. I don't know. Maybe it's their way to go interstellar and all. That is kind of on different ways. And when we had As in Gardens, So in Tombs, in my opinion, this is more like in line, being the consistency with the previous album. So once again, nothing really is similar with this modern day of And Oceans as with the original ones, which we already saw. But as you can see, members have changed, though there are still some original members, like for example, the guitarists Tees, Timo and Teemu from 1995. But for example, Kauko Kuusisalo, one of the best metal drummers in Finnish extreme metal scene, he joined as late as 2018. Antti Simonen, keyboards 2018. Matthias, the vocalist 2019. Pyry Hanska of various bands. He plays in a lot of bands. 2020. So a lot of things have changed apart from the guitar section. And if you look at the past members, well, they had quite a bit of skilled, good musicians. Kenny, really good vocalist. Mikael was a good bass player. Martex was good drummer also. And so forth. You got Janne on drums, Cipher on guitars, bass, etc. So a lot of things change over the years, but they always somehow manage to get skilled musicians. And especially I think the drumming is something that resonates. And this is by no means to disrespect the guitar guys, but it's just wonderful that these guys didn't have to, settle down with some kind of a B-level option. They had the skill and they were able to replace people with skill. And that's just great. But maybe it has something to do that these guys, first of all, they're good guys. They're easy to get along with, which goes a long way when you're having a band. And these guys had the passion to do music, and they did good albums, one after another. Even though I'm not a big fan of the second album and not maybe third one. But, it's like they are decent albums. But ever since, from Cipher and all, they've done nothing but good. So it's an interesting band, and in my opinion, one of the cornerstones when it comes to more symphonic style of black metal coming from Finland. So it's great that they're back, and what can I say is I hope really, really good years for these guys, both on recordings and lives and whatsoever. Obviously, there are a couple of interviews I've made with the band, so in case I got you interested, check them out once out. And before we go, there are news that the new album is coming out, supposedly 2025. That's something that we also talked about in the interview, and also the band's social media has been very open and public about it, that the new album has more or less been recorded. Probably this time already recorded and moved on, but at least maybe a few weeks ago, there were just some social media posts that now recording guitars or vocals are already done. So, thumbs up for year 2025 and Oceans album. We welcome that. And if I got you interested, really check out the interview, check out the music. And also, if you find true fun in your hearts, check out Havoc Unit. Check out even the band called O, if you have the time and will. Links are obviously in the Metal Archive site, and I will have the And Oceans links included in the description box. Now, go and enjoy some symphonic black metal from Finland.